truth, I don't know where I'm coming here from.
I hear.
I hear, yeah.
Well, welcome everyone back into the sanctuary. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our district superintendent, John Tucker, who has come down all the way from Corvallis. Come on in, Kathy. Yes, the meeting is in here. John has been our district superintendent for 6 years, correct? And most of us in this room have roots in the Methodist tradition, but there are a fair number that are also non-Methodist and new to the things, including me, the pastor. So one of the things that we do in our tradition is to have a charge conference. So sometimes it'll happen on Zoom, but today we have John in person, which is a treat for us all. So
I don't know if it's a treat. We'll see if it's a treat.
yeah, let's
All
go
right.
ahead and get started. I think Jean is coming in, but we've got.
Okay. Well, we'll have a prayer here in just a second to get started, but I will say it's good to be here. I've been here before, but it has been probably pre-COVID since I was last here. But I'm delighted that Logan is here as your pastor, and so glad that worked out, and the way that she was able to kind of share the job with Karen for a little while, and now move into this. And so I've just been delighted. I was able to go to her ordination service, which was a wonderful experience. That I'd never been to Lutheran ordination before, and it was fantastic. So I'm glad for her that she's here. I'm glad for you that she's here, and I'm glad for you that she has you. So anyway, so let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll get started. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for this beautiful day, and we thank you for this opportunity to come together and to talk about the church and to think and plan and pray for the future of the church. I ask your blessing upon Pastor Logan and upon these people and the ministry that they engage in together. And bless our time together in this conversation. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So before we get into charge conference work proper, Logan and I have been talking for quite a while about moving into this. It's called the accountable leadership model. Sometimes it is referred to in a shorthand way, single board governance. But its proper name is accountable leadership model. And I have talked a little bit about it before here in previous discussions, but as I say, that's been 3 years ago or longer. Mainly the design, the desire for this is it kind of resets the church. It doesn't create anything new that's not already in the existing traditional model, but it does offer clarity, and it does allow for fewer people to do the roles, because a lot of our churches are struggling with their numbers, and it's harder and harder to find people to serve in roles. And so this is kind of a way of addressing multiple concerns. So accountable leadership, it is all about determining who has responsibilities for things in church, who has authorities for those things in church, and those two things go together. If you're the responsible person, then you get authority in that area. And then accountability is about how does everybody hold everyone accountable to the larger vision and goal of the church. And that's something that if you don't have, you should work on. What is the vision of this congregation? What are the values that you hold dear? Because those are ultimately how you hold everybody accountable in the roles that they're doing. So in the old model, in the traditional model, you had an SPRC, you had a trustees, you had finance, you had nominations, and then you had a lot of other sub-teams, some ministry teams and things like that. The only thing that changes in this is you still have any ministry team that you want. That's totally fine. But you don't have to elect those people. So if you've got people in nurture and outreach and witness or children's education or music, you don't have to elect those people. They're there because of their giftedness. And so, the last thing you want to do is have them rotate off if they're gifted in that area. But the administration, those are the areas where you do elect at a charge conference, and those have terms, and you do want to rotate off if possible. And the reason for that is that's kind of the way we do democracy in the Methodist churches. We don't vote for everything at a congregational level, but we anticipate that people are cycling through so that different people have voices in leadership at different times. And so it's a way of trying to encourage more voices, but without the politics of everything being a congregational vote. So I believe in my conversations with Logan, you can do the accountable leadership model in a variety of ways, but I think we settled on trying to find 8 people. Is that right?
Yeah, 8 to 9.
8 to 9 people. And so this is how it would work. And some of you probably know if you're being nominated for this or not already. But so you're going to have 8 people, and they are going to be your governing board. So in the past, I don't know what you've called, if you had like an ad council or a church council. Okay, you can call it that if you want to. It doesn't matter to me. But for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to call it governing board, just because the new language here helps us understand that there is a reset going on. And so you're going to have 8 or 9 people on your governing board. And the way this works is everybody on the governing board is basically wearing 2 hats. The first hat that everybody's wearing is that you're on the governing board. And so that means that everybody on the governing board, all 8 or 9 people, every last one of you are trustees. Every last one of you are finance. And every last one of you are SPRC. Now, when you meet or when you're conducting weekly life in the church, what you want to have is a couple of people who take responsibility for managing those areas of church life. So, on the governing board, you might have 2 people who are not only wearing their governing board hat, but they're also going to wear the finance hat, which means that they're going to kind of manage that part of church life for the daily and weekly, goings on in the church. And you might have 2 or 3 people who wear the SPRC hat, which are the lead people that the pastor might bounce ideas off of or have conversations with around staffing and things like that. And you might have 2 to 3 people who are property, who are just going to just handle things in the building as they need handling. But that's kind of just a sub-team. So if you ever wanted to have a big decision, let's say you're going to renovate a space, well, those 2 or 3 people who are acting as the trustees, they don't get to make that decision. All 8 or 9 people get to make that decision because they're all the trustees, really. But it seems crazy to have all 8 or 9 people managing every little thing of church life. So if you've got somebody who, do you have a name of somebody who's going to be on your SPRC this coming time?
Amanda Sarles.
Okay, so Amanda.
Jim Waterman.
All right, so Amanda is being designated as an SPRC person on the governing board, meaning that she's going to put most of her attention into helping in that area. But everybody else on the governing board is on SPRC too, so it's not just Amanda. Usually that's not going to come into play unless you were having a pastoral change. So if you had a local staff issue, then the pastor and the 2 or 3 people who are designated SPRC would probably handle that themselves, talk it over, make any decisions that need to be made. But if you're at the SPRC and there's going to be a pastoral change, and the district superintendent comes in and wants to talk to you about the pastoral change, the district superintendent's going to meet with all 8 or 9 people because you're all SPRC. Does that make sense? So if you are, if you know that you're being nominated for something and you're here today, raise your hand. Do you know? Okay, and do you know the subgroup that you've been asked to do? Or okay, so whatever your subgroup is, that's the group that you'll kind of handle with Pastor Logan, and manage from daily and weekly stuff. But again, if it's the big stuff, setting the budget, well, that's not just the 2 or 3 finance people. That's the governing board that would set the budget. So it's kind of a balance of big picture and daily management that you're kind of handing off. Is that?
Can you speak a little bit to, so you mentioned the SPRC, trustees, and finance, but there's also a portion of folks that are at-large members we had discussed.
Yeah, and you can do that. You can have at-large members. That kind of gives you an opportunity if you want to make sure you have more diversity on your governing board. When I was pastoring a church, I would even occasionally ask someone from out in the community who was like heading an organization or a nonprofit to serve in that role, just because it helps the church to keep its vision up and out in the community. So you can use those at-large spots to get creative. If you're having a hard time finding people, though, who will take on some of those subgroup responsibilities, then you might go into those at-large spots and say, okay, will you help with trustees, or will you help, those kinds of things. So yeah, that's what gets you to 8 or 9. And, in a very large church, it doesn't really matter. Churches that do this, that have 150 in worship, they might have a governing board of 12 people. So it's, for you to have a governing board of 8 or 9, you actually have a higher representation than you would in a larger church. And so this works to help things stay smooth, to help all the decision makers be at the table at the same time. What needs to happen, though, when you do this model is you need to have regular opportunities, whether it's quarterly or twice a year or whatever, depends on what's going on in the church. You want to have town hall meetings because you want to hear the input of the congregation. So it's not like these 8 to 9 people are just in a bubble on their own making all the decisions. They would need to stay in touch with and in tune with the congregation. So that's one of the reasons that doing kind of a vision or a values assessment early on is important, because the congregation determines what those are. These are our values, these are our convictions, and that kind of governs the governing board. If the governing board then does things that are way out of step with the church, then you can elect new people at a church conference, or you can express your concerns to the pastor. So the goal is not to give a handful of people all this control. The goal is to have a group of people that can actually work together and manage the life of the church and make some of the decisions that is just too much for 40 people to make. And so that's kind of the thinking behind it. And as I say, it doesn't create anything new that's not already in the discipline, but it kind of rearranges it so that it's easier to understand, and churches don't feel like they have to have a nomination sheet that's 2 pages long. Because if you're like, I know you're like most of our churches, you don't have a very deep bench. You've got people that you've got, and that's about it. So this helps with that too. So,
Thank you.
any other
Yeah.
questions about it? Or? Yes.
How often does it change?
So it would operate just like it has traditionally. You would have people on there for a term. And so if you're starting it new, you might have people staggered with different terms. But once you're rolling, you would come on for a 3-year term and rotate off. And somebody can serve 2 consecutive terms if that's fine. There's no rule saying they can't do more than that, but it's just kind of a good, healthy practice to, after 2 terms, to try to find a new voice to put on there, just so that the same people aren't always, making the decisions. That's just kind of a good way of fairness and things like that. So, yes.
So in other words, as I understand this then say we have currently, say we have 6 people on SPRC and 6 people on trustees and 6 people on finance.
Right.
So those committees would sort of, most of the members would kind of be relieved of their responsibilities, and there'd only be the 2 major players from each one of those areas, right?
Right. If you're transitioning from that approach where you have all these separate committees with all these people on them, so basically what you're doing is you're putting them all in one group, and you're just reducing the number of people so that you have them all at the table at the same time. And so I don't know what you currently do, or if you've had to. How are you transitioning from what you are to? Are you having to parse down some of the committees, or?
We are parsing down some of the committees. Trustees has always been one of those committees where people have dropped off, so we only have 2 currently right now.
Right.
So Scott is staying on for that role for another 2 years. SPRC is a group that has 5 right now, so we're reducing that to 2, for example.
Okay.
And finance has had 4 or 5, I believe, and now it's reduced to 2. But of course, for something like finance, not just the 2 people that are in charge of that are the only people responsible. We have counters, we have all these other things that are part of the daily life of the church that will continue. It's just a matter of who holds that leadership at that table where
Right.
decisions are being made. Does that help a little bit? Yeah.
And please, one of the mistakes that some churches make when they do this is nothing changes as far as getting the work done. If you're on the property team or the trustee team, and something needs happening in the church, needs fixing in the church, and you know somebody in the congregation who does that work, well, just like you did in the past,
Right.
ask them to do it. It's not like these 2 people have to
Right.
physically do all the work. They're just the folks that are kind of
Right.
overseeing the property and assessing what needs to happen. And that's true in all these areas. If you have people who work with the money, they don't have to be on the governing board. They can just be a sub-team that works with the 2 people, So it's there's no serious gatekeeping here as far as people doing the jobs. So
Right. Thanks. Will
Anything
you
else?
speak to the role of council president and the role of lay leader? Because I have asked for there to be a council president. In my understanding, and you can all correct me, I guess. In my understanding, the lay leader has had this special role of being able to sit on all the different boards, and because of simple governance being kind of flattens that leadership model, there is just one board. So there's not a need for a lay leader as much as there is a need for a council president. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's right. 'Cause, so the lay leader position in the traditional model kind of evolved. So you had somebody along with the pastor who would go to all the committee meetings. So one of the things we're trying to cut down on is all these committee meetings. So now you've got basically one. And so churches do it different ways. In churches that I've pastored, we've had a chairperson of the governing board, and that we called that person the lay leader, just because it seemed to make sense. There, you don't have to do it that way. Some churches have the SPRC. Whoever's going to be their SPRC lead would be the chairperson of the governing board, and that makes some sense too, because again, if there was an issue with the pastor, then the district superintendent would talk to the SPRC chair head, and it's kind of nice if that's also the governing board chair head. But there's no hard and fast rules on that. But because you're trying to keep the numbers manageable, I think a lot of churches just say the chairperson of the governing board, if it's not the SPRC chair, is the lay leader of the congregation. But you can have a separate lay leader too. There's no, not telling you what to do. I'm just saying the reason that position was created, it kind of goes away in this new model. But if you want to have it, you can still have it. Just another person that would be added to the mix. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I have another question.
Sure.
So if we decide to go for this, does it take effect immediately, or not until January, or when?
Yeah, it would take January 1, just when the new elections, people who are elected today to office technically begin January 1st. So that would be the new model, would kick in January 1st.
So our charge
Great.
conference today is going to be nominating people who will be taking over then the 1st of January.
Right,
So
right.
the old jobs will stay through January.
Yeah, everything will stay as the same. Yeah, that's right. Any other questions, or anybody who's currently on leadership want to say anything about pros and cons to the change or anything like that?
John, I have to ask you, what do you see the downside of this style of
Right.
leadership?
The downside has been in some churches where people have taken the message that somehow if they're not on the governing board, they're not supposed to take responsibility for anything in the church. And so some churches, again, most of the churches that have been properly trained in this haven't had this issue. We had a number of churches about 4 years ago rush into this model without any real training on it. They just decided to do it. So the message is not that we need fewer volunteers. You need as many volunteers as you ever did. We need people who are not on the governing board to do the things that where they're gifted and talented. So you still need volunteers, and volunteers are still encouraged. And the only thing this would accomplish is have a little bit clearer kind of communication line. So if you're somebody who volunteers with the property, doing things around the church, you would know who are the people that you would talk to about things property related, because they would be here are your 2 people from governing board that are in charge of that area. So it kind of helps communication. But some churches did see a dip in volunteerism because they weren't communicating that. And people kind of thought, well, I guess it's just those 8 people's job. No, it's not just those 8 people's job.
Right.
So that's very important to remember.
One more comment that I would just want to see if anybody would like to feed in is one of my concerns is that we have a very large church council with lots of voices. Some of those voices then will drop off. And I'm wanting to know from those people who are in those jobs, if they're willing to, UMW, UMM, Leadership Committee, several of them then really won't actually have a voice in the council. Is there any negative feeling by any of those people who suddenly won't be on the council anymore?
Well, if I could speak to that, I will say that I have invited a member of women of faith. I've invited someone from Nurture to be at that table. So I've tried to address that concern by filling at-large member roles there.
And that's a good way of doing that. So when you meet, how many people do you have at your meetings? When you have a
Last council, I feel like we had about 15 people. Kathy has the notes. She's moving. It felt large, and it felt harder to discern who had voice for me.
Right.
And so that's what I love about this town hall meeting, is because there's space for people to speak about what they want to say, and there's thoughtful time for that. So, but I would love for our meetings to be efficient so that people feel like their time is not being wasted, and for us to be energized and creative and cooperative with one another. And so this seems like an opportunity to facilitate that to our best ability. So my door is always open for concerns, and I do my best to meet those. So I would just encourage that too. People have voice here.
Yeah. And I think, one of the shifts that you kind of want to start thinking about is for this 8 or 9 people that are on your governing board, their primary job is to think about the big picture stuff of the church.
Right.
So what happens in our churches it happens in all the churches. So everybody's equally guilty of this. As our council meetings or our governing board meetings turn into places where reports are given and every decision is debated.
Right.
That is a waste of your time. That is not discipleship. That is not being a faith community. When I went to Medford, I got a little horror story for you. When I went to Medford, they had 65 people on their administrative board. How many brave decisions do you think they ever made? Because when you have that many people making every little decision, they told me before I got there, they had an hour-and-a-half meeting over the kind of coffee they were going to, make. None of those are discipleship questions. So you want your 8 or 9 people to be thinking big picture. Who is the church for this community? Again, this is where you're taking stock of the congregation. What are the values of this church? What do we need to be for this community? What decisions do we need to make that are going to be in the best interest of the church? And so, sometimes it's a big adjustment for churches that are used to every last person having veto power over every idea. And that's how a lot of our churches function. Is you have big meetings, and if 1 or 2 people don't like something, it ends it. This is to prevent that from happening, because you've got your 8 or 9 people who you've elected to make the decisions that need to be made, and so they're tasked with that responsibility, and with that responsibility comes some authority. And in my experience in Methodist churches, we don't want to hold anybody accountable for anything except the pastor. This allows other people to be held accountable, and it makes clearer the authority, responsibility roles for things. So it is a little bit of a culture change, but it's a culture change in the right direction, I think. And if your governing board are people that you elect because you trust them, and they're going to stay in touch with the congregation and listen, because ultimately a congregation votes with its feet or its pocketbook. And so you want people in leadership who are invested in the congregation. This is not a power grab. It's a refocusing of the roles that we play in church life. So, yes.
Been some value, it seems to me, in having an SPRC that was sort of off to the side a little bit to work with the pastor on confidential issues.
Right.
So let's just say that congregant Jim over there gets his nose bent out of shape about something that the pastor said wrong.
Right.
Okay. That could be dealt with without and there's a need for confidentiality about that.
Right.
But all of a sudden that issue of Jim with his nose bent out of joint and the pastor is being heard by the church council, I assume.
Right.
And that's confidential. And so now you've got the central leadership of the church involved in this brouhaha about
right.
coffee coffee or something.
Right, yeah. Well, so what I would do, and I think this is how that would be intended to work, is so you've got your 2 or 3 people on there who are going to be your SPRC managers. So let's say Jim, is that who you said it was? Whatever the name is of the person that's got their nose out of joint. So the first thing I would do is I would go to those 2 or 3 people, and let's talk about this and see if it can be managed in that small group. A lot of times what has happened also is we say, well, there's another party in the church that is close to the disgruntled individual and close.
Happens to be on the church council. Is that
Oh, no. I mean, you could go to somebody else. I mean, I've had disgruntled people, and I go to somebody that I trust and is close to me and is close to that person, and I will say, would you talk to them, or you and I talk to them? So you still want to handle things as discreetly as possible.
So there's still a functioning, and essentially there's a subcommittee.
There's a subcommittee, yeah. If it's a major issue, then it belongs in front of those 8 or 9 people, which would be the same as your SPRC would have in the past. So that during that meeting, that's a confidential meeting. So that's the other issue that I'm glad you bring this up. So meetings are typically open because you're not. I tell pastors this all the time. Do your town hall meetings. If you want to have a vision retreat, you should go away for a vision retreat. That should just be you and the leaders. That's not open to everybody because you got to open up, share. You're not on display. You're speaking honestly. Those kinds of things. But then when you're coming in and you're having your meetings, and ideally, I think your governing board meets once every 2 months, or once even a quarter is even better. But that's hard for some churches to do. So you have open meetings, so everybody shows up, and you hear voices, and then you make the decision. The 8 or 9 people make the decision, unless you are discussing a personnel issue, in which case you just have to let people know we're moving into a confidential session, or you have a special meeting that's
Beforehand,
that's
maybe.
just not advertised, and you deal with the confidential
Right.
stuff. So you still have to do that, and you have to handle that the way that you need to handle it. But generally speaking, for most, I mean, it's just the same as any other group. A group needs time to be private so that they can open up and share, and a group needs to do its work in a public way so that people can know what's going on. So you have to balance both of those things. So, yes.
On the same topic, you may have said it and I missed it, I don't know. If you had a confidential session, you would have the whole 8 or 9 people involved in that?
Yes, if it was a matter that the SPRC folk, the reps, and the pastor thought we needed to just bring this to the whole group, and it is about whether it's a staff or it's somebody in the church, and you would say we're going to keep this. We need to have a confidential meeting. Then you would have a confidential meeting. Yeah.
Yeah, there would really be negatives and positives to pull a few people out. And that's, I don't know about that. That might be very difficult to make it a confidential meeting with only, say, half of the people or something.
Right. Well, I think once at that point, I mean, if the 2 or 3 people who are SPRC representatives and the pastor, if they, that group, that's a little subgroup of confidentiality. So they might say, let's see if we can handle this on our own. There's no reason, because there's so many reasons for that. First of all, you don't want to besmirch the reputation of whoever the other party is, whether they're a staff person or somebody. There's no reason for everybody to know that there's
Right.
trouble. But if that little sub team thinks this is bigger than us, then you have it with the full governing board. Yeah, yeah.
And then that would be, I guess, a closed governing board.
And that would be and that's probably not very different from how you do things now. If you had an issue like that, you're not going to bring it to the congregation and so. So I mean, it'd be kind of very similar to what you're already doing in that regard. So I imagine that, because Logan and I have spoken a little bit, if you have 3 teams of 6 people right now, that's a lot of people for this church to.
Yeah.
Could you nominate 18 people right now if you had to, for roles?
I think so.
You think so? I mean, because
Yeah.
it's been a challenge, and not just for you, but for a lot of churches, it's a big challenge to ask 9 people to be on SPRC, 9 different people to be on trustees, and have all these different people because you
Right.
just don't have the numbers. I mean, the traditional model arose when we were much stronger as an institution. And so, so part of the pluses of this is you don't have to be just finding names to put on slots, because that's always been my policy as a pastor. I will not put a name on a slot just because I'm told to. I would rather it sit vacant than have just a name down. And I'll just tell my DS, tough, we don't have the right person, so I'm not putting the person on here, And so, so Logan's got to learn where she can tell me that.
Yeah.
So, but, most DSs are, we're just like you. We think, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So anyway, so you want to have the right people. It's better to have the right people. It's better to have nobody than not the right people.
Right.
So.
Right. I just want to, unless someone was about to say something, go ahead.
Oh, yes.
In changing the model, are there any changes in the nomination process? Because I can see how people would feel like it's possible that this can turn into sort of a takeover situation where just a smaller group of
Right.
people are sort of.
Right. Yeah. First of all, if you feel like that is starting to happen, call me in and we'll talk. But I hear what you're saying. So the nominations team is usually independent of the other teams. So what I would suggest is, in a church your size, I think, because the pastor chairs nominations, that if you had to get things started, if you just had 2 to 3 people to serve on nominations with you, and that's how you get things rolling with this process. And then what I've done in the past is, when somebody rotates off of a governing board, so not somebody who's doing another term, but when they are rotating off, I've always asked them, would you now serve on nominations? Because you know the job and you know what you're asking people to do because you've done it. And you no longer have any vested interest because you're not on it anymore. And the nominations, nominations are very important. I don't want to minimize it. It's a very important position, but you really only meet one time a year. So it's not heavy duty, work. And so it's you meet when you're getting ready for your charge conference, basically. So that's how I've done it, is just have people, when they're leaving their other position, move into nominations because they know it. But you can handle that any way you wish. There's no, whatever feels right.
I'm assuming that one of the keys to feeling like people, to kind of undercutting that feeling of the insider and outsider thing,
Right.
is to make sure that the nominating committee is really functioning.
Right.
There's a tendency that can happen for nominating committee to sort of be there, but the pastor's really the one that's making all the decisions.
Right.
To do things.
Yeah. That's why the nominations committee is a little bit separate from everybody else, because they're kind of working on the system of the church. And so you want to have people who know the congregation well. The reason the pastors are put in chair roles is not so they just name their folks, but because the thinking is, not always true, but the thinking is that pastors tend to know everybody in the system in a little different way than you know each other. And one of the things that nominations committees have done over my career, which is, I understand it, but it's terrible, is, well, now Joan hadn't been on anything for a few years. Let's put Joan on something. That's not how you do nomination, because then it's about honoring people rather than who are the people who are gifted to do this role. And so, okay, Joan may be wonderful. She hasn't been on anything in 5 or 6 years. She doesn't need to be on anything now either. So you have to have those kinds of. You have to be able to have real conversations.
Right.
And I would guess that this is still not going to be very different from how you're functioning now. I mean, you currently have a small group of leaders. They may be divided over the teams, but you still have a small group of people who are making decisions. Not everything's coming to the congregation. So I don't really think you're going to experience much difference in the way church feels to you. I think if anything, though, you will have more clarity. Is that, oh yeah, if I have this thing, I need to go to that person. So. Any other
One thing I'll add and maybe amplify something that you said and a while back about this, this governing board that was 65 people, and it was hard to make decisions. One of the things that I've been doing as I've been meeting with leaders is trying to impress upon the fact that this is a time to vision and a time to be brave as well. This is a time of the church, especially after the pandemic, where church is changing fast. And we love this church. I love this church. Y'all are here because you love this church. And God has given us so much to go and serve the world with, but so much love and courage and everything we need for the journey. So I think that this is an opportunity for us to really step into that space of courage and do what God has called us to do, and also make space for that discernment, and to really think about what our identity is here and now and what we're called to do here and now, because God is always our center and God never changes, but things shift over time, how we are called to step into that. So I'm really excited about the opportunity. I'm really excited about the opportunity to do that, because I think the time is ripe right now. So, yeah.
And I will say this, I mean, Logan wouldn't say this, and might not have even thought of this, but so by having your 8 or 9 people team that works with Logan, and the hope is that they really get to know each other, this whole process is built on trying to get back to a place of trust. Much of how Methodist churches operate is based on distrust, which is where it comes from when you say, we want to make sure everybody knows what's going on about every little thing. That's because we don't trust folks. And so this is about trust. And those 8 or 9 people who, again, are from you are going to build a relationship with each other, with the pastor, do some visioning work. But here's one other role that they play, and this is very important, is that when you've done the visioning work and decisions start getting made, I've already told you, pastors are often the only ones that are held accountable. Pastoring a church is extraordinarily stressful. It is extraordinarily vulnerable. You feel like you are responsible for things that nobody gives you authority over. So as the pastor, I've often felt like everybody wants to know why I didn't arrange for it to be a sunny day. I mean, that's a joke, but it's not much of one. I don't know. I don't know why certain people quit coming to the church. It's not my job to go get them back. That's not the pastor's job. But everybody has something in their brain that they think is the pastor's job that isn't the pastor's job. It's very difficult to be a pastor, which is why we have burnout and we have people leaving the ministry. So, one of the biggest roles for those 8 or 9 people is that when a decision is made and people in the church, or somebody in the church isn't happy, those 8 or 9 people have the pastor's back. They don't say, well, that's a good point, I don't like it either. They say, we made this decision, Pastor Logan knows what's going on, this was made in good faith, and we support her. And I'm just not going to entertain, I just don't need to hear every gripe. And so the other thing, so that's very important. I mean, this is about getting a church healthier. And I've said this in a lot of the churches. The way, I mean, I'm not saying about y'all necessarily, but in the way that most of our churches govern, it allows the least mature 15% of the congregation to have the loudest voice. In this model, it is the most mature 15% that has the voice, not the least mature. Because we need people to grow up and to be adults and to not realize, church is not the place where you get your menu item the way you want it. And a lot of people go to our churches and it's like they go to their favorite restaurant. It's like, that's my seat. You know what I want. Give it to me. That's not church. And that's not the pastor's job. So the whole thing is a reorienting of ourselves towards our calling to be disciples, to make a transformational impact on the world around us, to treat each other kindly and with respect, and to understand that we're all facing different kinds of challenges. And a pastor, this is a tough role. When I see young people like Logan coming into this role, I'm like, what are you thinking? No, but I mean, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. And I think this group helps build empathy because this group will get to know the pastor and will be able to have empathy with that situation and communicate that to the congregation. And that's important, I think. So this is me being candid, so y'all. Any other questions on that? All right.
Are we feeling more clarity about what simple governance is? Because I've been hearing whispers back to me that people don't understand what this is. And I would encourage people, like, come to the training, but yes, keep asking more questions. But how temperature check.
Yeah, I really appreciate, that you're both being very candid, and, I just think with a small church like ours, that it's really important to continue to really pull people for their natural gifts and to make it smaller, and I really think it's a great idea, and, I appreciate you explaining it, and I feel really good about it.
So often we've put round pegs in square holes, just to
Right.
fill that line,
Right, yeah.
and that's been detrimental.
Well, one thing I'll say, and this is something I realized as we were going through it, I've been through this in a couple of churches as a pastor, and I've experienced the rough ride, and I've experienced it going smoother, and I've seen the problems and all this kind of. So it's not going to be magical, everything will be blissful, but it does allow you to kind of have some clarity about how you're going to get the work done. But one of the things that it kind of speaks to is, I began by saying, you don't do this for nurture, witness, outreach, education, music, the things that are the true ministries. You don't do this process with. You're not electing people to that. We're all called to do the things that are who we are and express our faith. And I don't need to be elected to do that. That's, you're you. And so, truth be known, that's the more important role. Part of what we're trying to do here is say that this administration stuff is not as important as people think it is. We're so concerned with power that we've made administration roles like the main be-all and end-all of church. When the only reason these positions exist is to support those of you who are doing things.
Right.
That's the only reason that's really it. Because what you're doing in the community, what you're doing with bringing yourself into this community and into this church with the gifts that you have, that's what matters. That's far more important. This is just structure, helping to make sure that everybody can do those things. And so that's why it's not such an honor to be asked to be on governing board. It's an honor that, look what this person has done in the community for 15 years and impacted lives. That's the call of discipleship. Serving on the ad board is not answering the call of discipleship. That's helping the church function so everybody else can. So anyway, I was just trying to kind of realign what's really important.
Right, thank you.
I was born a Methodist and have gone to a series of different churches as I've moved from town to town.
Right.
And encountered some problems, some of them fairly large.
Right.
And I was in the Myrtle Point church when we had to close, which was heart-rending. And I find this whole system that you're proposing really clear-cut. I think you will know if you have a problem who to go to.
Right. Yeah.
That's not always been the case.
Right, absolutely. And again, I just want to reassure everybody, because you make up some huge decisions, church closure, buying property, things like that. Those will always be an all-church conference. Every member gets a say in those big decisions like that. So that doesn't change. It's not like these 8 or 9 people can decide, well, we're going to close. No, it's the big decisions still come to an all-church conference. And so, as I say, not really much is changing other than clarity around roles. That's the main issue here. But yeah, I just want to make sure that that's... And I will say, I talked about how pastors are sometimes the only ones held accountable. I'm also aware of the fact that in our system, there's been a lot of pastors who've never been held accountable for some misbehavior. And I know that's true too. And so there's trust issues going all the way up in our conference and all that kind of stuff. But what I will say is I can only function the way I function. And you do have a recourse. If the pastor does something that's terrible, the district superintendent is the person who can call that pastor to account.
Right.
So it's not like, we have systems set up for everybody to be held accountable. And we have let that down in a lot of ways over our history of our institution. And I'll admit that. But it's not going to happen under my watch if I can keep it from it. And so, there is a way to handle things. And so I think pastoral accountability is huge. But I think all accountability is good. So, and the bishop holds me accountable. So.
Yeah.
I don't know if you would want to get into this at all. It's another subject completely. But where do we stand right now with the schism of the Methodist Church?
Well, I can talk about that, but let's hang on to that for 1 second. I have planned that we would have to talk about that. Are there any other questions about this? Does everybody feel like they're in a good place going forward with this? Because this is what Logan and the nominations are planning to present for elections, is this new model. So I want to see if everybody, I don't care if you're a voting member or not, I'd like to know how the room feels about proceeding with this approach. Everybody okay with it? Okay. So when we come to that part of the charge conference and we elect people, just everybody know that we're moving into that. So okay. Great. I appreciate this opportunity, and I appreciate the honesty, and I know it's difficult to try something different. On the denominational. Well, I feel like I've been saying this for 5 years, but something's about to happen. So, they keep telling us it's going to. So here's what we know. We do know that disaffiliations are now occurring. And so the Judicial Council ruled that annual conferences as a whole cannot disaffiliate. So Oregon, Idaho could not say, we're out of the Methodist Church because we want to be more progressive. Or North Alabama, which I know well, can't say, we're out of the Methodist Church because you're too progressive. No, local churches can disaffiliate. And so what we're seeing is, and there has been the establishment of the Global Methodist Church, which is the traditionalist new denomination, right. And that is where a lot of those folks are going to go, and are already going, and the churches are disaffiliating. I heard that in one of the Florida annual conferences, there are 100 churches disaffiliating because they're conservative. Now that's a lot, but there's 1,000 churches in Florida, so it's 10%. Mm-hmm. So it's not quite the even split that the traditionalists kept saying. You're going to lose everybody. No, there's a lot of kind of mainline Methodists out there who have not been particularly vocal about the issues, but they don't want to leave the denomination. And so in Oregon, Idaho right now, I think we have 8 to 10 churches that are on our watch list. Not all of them will disaffiliate. If half of them disaffiliate, that's a good number. They are almost, with one exception, they are almost all very small churches, meaning half the size that you are or a quarter the size of you. So when I say small, I mean small. 12 people in worship, and they want to disaffiliate. And these are churches that have never been Methodist, really. They haven't been Methodist in 50 years. I got one I could name, but I won't. I want to, but I won't. And they want out, and I want them out. Go with my blessing. And so we're having this, we have to have these conversations around property, because all property is held in trust with the annual conference. So church closes, the annual conference takes possession of the property. Disaffiliation allows for some other steps to happen to try to get churches who want to disaffiliate a little bit of a better deal so they can keep their property. Most of these little churches, again, we're talking very tiny churches, and many of them are in extremely old buildings, one of which is almost falling down. The conference has no interest in that property anyway. So, and so that is happening. So I think to answer the question is people are sorting themselves now. What that's going to look like after the next general conference, I don't know for sure, but the anticipation is that the progressives are going to have more of a voice. And you need to remember this too, because this was surprising to me. Whenever the last general conference was, when the traditionalist won the vote, they barely won it. Now, I grew up in the South, in the Southeast jurisdiction, and the myth was that everybody in the South, they're traditionalists and they don't like, people in the LGBTQ plus community. Well, even with that huge Southeastern bloc, which is the biggest population bloc in our denomination, even with all that, the traditionalist vote barely passed. So now a lot of those people are pulling out. So I think the anticipation is that after all this sorts, the general conference is going to be in a position to drop some language in the discipline that's currently in the discipline that's antagonistic to LGBTQ plus, and to try to move on in a different direction, much like our Lutheran brethren they've already done. And so I feel optimistic about that issue. Now, all that can be true, and our churches are still struggling. And so I've kind of joked for a long time, if progressives ever prevail, it'll be like, great, now back to decline. Because we've got to do something about turning around our churches and not continuing to decline. So, anyway, yes.
I have a friend in South Carolina, and she's a Methodist, and she was saying that, a lot of the churches are voting at this time. And, Jim and I were talking about that, and we were like, well, so we were just wondering about the Northwest, and, because we're a reconciliation church, are we already, we're already LGBTQ, so plus. Are we still going to have to vote? And when will this happen? I mean, as far as, are we behind or what?
No. In all practical ways, our annual conference is a reconciling conference. And so you will not need to do anything if you want to be with reconciling values and convictions. The churches, by and large, that are wanting to disaffiliate are very conservative, bordering on fundamentalist. We have had one church that was interested in disaffiliating because they were more progressive, but they've changed their minds and they're going to stay with us because I think they see a similar future. And that would have been a big deal. That does happen from time to time. I certainly get those convictions. I'm right there with them. But I also think that I think we're moving in a good place. So, All right. Well, we got some business to take care of. So we've had a good conversation. So I won't do much of the conversation that I'm going to do in a lot of our churches. But I will say, even though he's just resigning from us, Dr. Leroy Barber has been on conference staff for 4.5 years. He's a good friend of mine. I'm sad to see him go. And he's done so much work in our conference around anti-racism, particularly anti-blackness. We've started more New Faith communities with people of color in the last 4.5 years than any conference that I know of. And Leroy he's probably the closest thing to a friend I've got on cabinet, but he has a great line, and his line is, innovation happens at the intersection of differences. And I take that to mean that wherever you have different people in the same space, coming from different perspectives, that is fertile ground for creativity and doing things in a new and different way. And so I'm asking my churches to ponder that phrase and to ask themselves, is there enough diversity in your room for innovation to happen? Because we are a pretty homogenous group of folks. And so, if that's true, how do we move towards more diversity? And it may not be having people come and join our church. Maybe it's the church gets up and goes and meets other people outside and works partnerships. So, it's just been a great experience with Leroy. I think that's a great question to reflect on. It'd be a good sermon series or a discussion group. Does innovation happens at the intersection of difference? And are we different enough to be innovative? Those are good questions, I think. So, okay, well, we got some business to take care of. Let's see here. Let's start with clergy compensation. I know we've had clergy compensation charge conference. We do them about every 2 months around here.
Yeah.
Well, it's because with Logan, with Karen and Logan sharing, and then Logan not being in a parsonage,
Right.
and then Karen dropping away and having to do a new charge conference for your
Right.
salary. Now you've moved into the parsonage. We had to do a different charge conference for that.
Yeah.
And now we're doing it for 2023. So hopefully this is the last one on compensation for a year.
Yes, that's my hope. Kathy Yelly has been filling out a lot of paperwork. She's probably done.
Yeah. So.
It is not the last. Thank
Oh, it's
you all
not?
for.
You have to do another one?
We will, because right now I'm working with ELCA for benefits for retirement, and we're in conversations about health insurance as well. So,
Okay.
so God bless us all.
So that'll be a later conversation then.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So for now, the form, I don't know who's seen it, who's had access to it, but anyway, the total cost for appointment time, and this would take effect January 1 of 2023, and this is the annualized amount, would be $25,495. Does that represent much of a change at all from what it is there this minute?
No.
Okay. So it's basically what you're
It's
doing
like
now.
$1,500 difference.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
And the numbers shifted a little bit when she moved in the parsonage. Actually, the numbers dropped a little bit because the parsonage is part of her comp. So it's $25,495. Again, that's annualized. So if things have to change in the course of the year, we'll reconvene and do another vote. But for now, that's what your budget for the salary next year would be. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, and who's taking minutes for us? Thank you so
Kathy
much.
Bones.
So if you would approve the compensation package for Logan, would you raise your hand? Okay, thank you. Any alternative opinions? Okay, so that is passed, that is approved on that. So thank you very much. Looks like you'll get a paycheck in January. That's good.
It's good.
So that's right. Okay. All right, let's see here. These are all my notes on the accountable leadership model. I didn't even need them, so that's good. Okay. Nominations. Do you want to present that to us?
Yes, I, along with my nominating committee, which is Pat Rollins and Kathy Waterman, I came up with a list of folks and kind of was in dialogue with them this past month. So I am delighted to say that Kathy Yelly, our treasurer, has said yes to being our council president. And excited about that. Scott Philbin, I've asked him to fill a 2-year position, role opening in 2025. Terry Woodward, who has been in finance for a while and has been my tried and true, is saying yes to a 2-year position, role opening in 2025. Amanda Sarles is saying yes to a 2-year position. Jim Waterman, 3-year position. Renee Hansen, Karen Bayless, Kathy Waterman, and then Linda Yoder will be our lay delegate for 2 more years.
So these are the folks that are going to be on the governing board.
Yes.
Except for the last person,
Except
the
for
delegate.
the last
Okay,
person,
yeah,
yeah.
'cause-
So 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, so delegates are charge conference members, but they wouldn't be governing board members. So those are the folks from which you will have your
Yes.
trustee team, your SPRC team.
Yes.
And so if you may not know all those yet. Do you know those, how that's going to be broken down?
Yes.
Okay.
So Scott has said yes to the trustee hat. Terry has said yes to finance. Amanda and Jim have said yes to SPRC. And then the last 3, Renee, Karen, and Kathy, have said yes to at-large membership.
Okay. So there may be a little more work that needs to be done from inside the committee to determine we need another person to
Right.
help with trustees, but that's not a nomination issue. You've already got your team, so they will have to figure out how they're going to move into different roles, and that'll need to be communicated to the congregation so everybody knows what's going on.
Okay.
But you're electing those, however many that was, 8 people? 9?
8 people.
8 people. Did you want to make a proposal regarding lay leader being the chairperson, or leave that undecided for now?
So, well, I thought we had discussed just calling that role council president.
Okay,
instead
which
of-
is, yeah, I mean, that's
yeah.
that's what I've done in the past, and so your lay leader and your council president are one and the same.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, and the hope for the council president would be that they would work with me a little bit closely about visioning and that
Okay.
sort of thing. Yeah.
And who is that person?
Kathy Yelly.
Okay. Kathy. Oh, are you Kathy? Okay. All right. All right. Okay. So, any questions, comments about this list?
Yeah, so Kathy, are you going to continue to be treasurer?
Pastor Logan's and my feeling is that that might be a little bit of a conflict of interest,
Uh-huh.
but, we'll have to find somebody who would like to take over that position and then train, have some training for them also.
Yes, so that's going to be something we'll figure out in the next month. It was just too tight of a timeline to, force someone into that position. So, yeah.
Okay. Do you need to hear those names again, or does everybody got them locked in? Do you want to list them again?
So we've got Kathy Yelly, Scott Philbin, Terry Woodward, Amanda Sarles, Jim Waterman, Renee Hansen, Karen Bayless, and Kathy Waterman.
Okay. All righty. So if you would elect those people to serve, would you please raise your hand? Okay. Thank you. Any alternative views? Okay. So that is approved. That roster is approved. Please let that be reflected in the minutes. I would like to, even though their time of service is not yet over, I would like to thank everyone who is currently serving in leadership, but who will be completing their term at the end of this year. If you're present, you want to raise your hand if you're currently in leadership? Okay. All right. Well, let's give these folks a round of applause. We do appreciate you. All right. Is there a membership report? Meaning, are you adding, are you taking names off of membership?
We've had one death
Okay.
since, yeah. So we'll prepare. Gene Hefty and I will prepare.
Okay, but you don't have any
yeah.
first year readings or second year readings?
No.
Okay, then that's good.
So do I mark yes or no on the question, did your charge conference have membership report first, second year reading?
No.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Gene is saying something. We did
Yes.
not submit a report because, yeah, but go ahead, Gene.
I was told there was not to be a report at this time.
Yes.
Okay, well,
Yes.
most of the membership numbers are now done in year-end reports.
Right.
The only
that's-
thing we
that's
would
my
do
hope,
here
yeah.
is if you wanted to pull names off first and second
Yep.
year readings, which not everybody does, so it's no
Yes.
big deal if you don't.
So Michael Arcoon had a second year reading.
Oh, okay, so you do have a second year reading? You know about that?
I guess so. We're welcoming some new members
Uh-huh.
later in the fall, so I was hoping to do that sort of thing
Okay.
at the end of the year instead of right now.
So was that name read last year? It was. Okay, well then we do need to take it up.
okay.
So what's the name again? Michael Arcoon. So that name was read last year on the first year reading. So the thinking is you read names 1 year, people continue to try to reach that person, make contact, determine that person's intent or desire. If no contact is made, you can't determine that person's intent, then you read the name at the second year, and if at the second year you approve it, then that name would be pulled from the active roll. If that person emerges and wants to be back in part of the church, they don't have to go through a new membership thing. You can just reinstate them.
Okay.
But this removes them from your active roll, your active roster. So,
Okay.
does anybody know anything about Michael? Want to speak to it? Okay.
Right.
Thank you for catching that. That's good. Okay, so if you would approve that name be taken from your active roll, would you raise your hand? Okay, thank you. So that's good. Let's see. I see that you. I know that there was finance information and that there was some special communication about. We want to make sure that churches are taking that seriously and not just putting in numbers from previous years. We've run into some issues around that. So do you feel good about your finance report, that it's accurate and complete?
We feel good about the report, yes. We've been
Okay.
honest with it.
Okay. Okay. Well, all right. That's good enough for me. Anyway.
There are some areas for improvement that is clear reading the questions
Okay.
that were asked on the report. So
Okay.
I'm hoping that, finance people can get together and take a look.
Okay. Well, that's good. I mean, mainly we've run into it mainly it becomes an issue if a church is disaffiliating or closing, and we have to know what all is going on with the finances and stuff. Also, we had a situation in a church where a longtime treasurer passed away, and nobody else in the church knew how to access any of the funds. So is that an issue here, or do you have more than one party who knows where everything is?
We do on some things, on other things is the report.
Okay.
Like the main things, yes, the bank accounts.
Right, yeah.
Yes, and QuickBooks, yes.
Okay.
You know, where everything's kept, but listed billers and sign-ons for their websites, that kind of thing.
Right,
I'm working on it.
Okay, thank you. All right. And then I see a trustees report. Thank you for that. And did I see safe sanctuaries? That's great. Trying to think, is there anything else we need to vote on?
We don't have a report on committee lay leadership?
Well, that would be the nominations report.
Oh, that's the nomination?
That's the nomination. Yeah, and some churches call it that, lay leadership. Some people call it nominations. So you're. All righty, Logan, this is your first charge conference.
Oh.
It's not too painful, is it?
Maybe a little pain, but we got through it, yeah.
When I was pastoring churches, I always got so nervous about my charge conference. They're like, oh, the DS is coming. I'm like, yeah. Now that I am a DS, it's like, yeah, don't worry about it. It's not that big a deal. So, well, I've enjoyed our time together, enjoyed this conversation. I love this church. I've had a wonderful experience whenever I've come to this congregation. I preached here several years ago, and it was a great experience for me. And so I'm proud of you, proud for you. Glad you're a reconciling congregation in this part of the state. We need those voices, and our whole nation needs those voices. So, anyway, anything else before we adjourn? Yes.
I just want to say that I'm very unhappy to hear Kathy Yelly thinking she cannot continue as treasurer because she's done a bang-up job. She was treasurer a couple of steps back and know what the job is, and it's not an easy one. It takes many hours most weeks, and she's been wonderful. So she will be hard shoes to fill.
All right, we'll take that as a gratitude there, Kathy. So, thank you. Okay. Logan, would you like to close us in prayer?
I would love to.
All right.
Gracious God, we thank you for the opportunity to gather and say yes to what you would have us do. So bless each person in this room and send us out with love and good care. We say this in your name. Amen.